bring up Whitman because I saw Faustin Liniakula's performance last night, My Body, My Archive, and I've been following Faustin's work for a while, and there was an interview with the playwright Peter Sellers that they did together, and Faustin Liniakula, he said, I dance because it helps me to remember my name. And after that, he said, I contain multitudes. And Peter Sellers said, you just quoted Whitman, and I think it was purposeful because it was in response to the paradoxes of being human. Whitman says, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I'm large. I contain multitudes. Welcome. My name is Robin Nisbet, and I am so excited to share my new podcast with you. In this introductory episode, I have the honor and delight of being interviewed by my dear friend, Dr. Giovanni Washington. We talk about people, traditions, land, ancestors, embodied and artistic practices, all things important to the Any Place podcast.
My name is Dr. Giovanni Washington, and I am the creator of the Black Goddess Within Oracle deck. I also do ancestral work, and I work with professional overachievers. That sounded weird. I work with overachieving professionals, not people who get paid to be overachievers, providing them a spiritual solution to help them combat their addiction to colonial pace. Robin Nisbet, you've given me the really distinct honor of interviewing you for your new podcast, which you are going to tell us about in a moment. You know, instead of giving you her credentials, like the things that she's accomplished in the world, I want to talk to you about the way that she walks through the world. And you are one of the most committed, loving, caring, honest, forthright people that I've ever met. I really feel like I can count the kind of people who walk with your sort of conviction and commitment in the world, like on one hand. Like it's less than 5 people, 100%. And the way that I see you interact with Ifa, the way that I see you interact with your dance practice, the way that I see you interact with even, with the children who are in your life, I think it's aspirational. It makes me want to be a better person. I think you're utterly trustworthy. And I recognize how hard it must be for you to walk through this world that is so full of speed and corruption and me-firstness.
Thank you, Giovanni. And I want to say about Dr. G.
That's me.
You're one of my best friends, and you've used the word obedient. We can talk about obedience later in another talk, but you've used the word obedient to talk about how you respond to the messages that the ancestors give you. And that is so beautiful to witness and to get to experience, because I've gotten to experience the manifestation of what those instructions are.
Ashe. Thank you for attending our Love Fest. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. I appreciate that, Robin. I do. And that's why I'm so excited to see you, at this point in the podcast production process.
Thank you.
I know you've had the name for a long time.
Mm-hmm. The name of the podcast is Any Place, the Any Place podcast, and it's Eni, which refers to Eniyan, which is in Yoruba and in Ifa, specifically from the Odu Irosun Iwori. It talks about Eniyan being human beings. And in this Odu, it talks about human beings being the specially selected ones to bring good things from heaven to earth. And so it's a play on words, obviously. And this came about because I was traveling as I was meeting different people and different traditions and learning about different traditions and dancing with different people. I wanted to share some of these experiences with whoever would be listening, but maybe back at home. I think part of my traveling experience was to understand what home means. Oyeku Ogbe is an Odu that says the world is the marketplace and heaven is home. Being in this world, sometimes being in this earthly body, can be a struggle. The human experience is such a struggle. There's this question about, for me, what does home mean? What does journey mean? And that's the tagline also of this podcast. This is a podcast about journey, home, connection, and spirit.
I think that's actually a great introduction or a great segue into the question. As one who contains multitudes and contradictions and complexities, who do you belong to?
I belong to my mother and my father. My father is my Isheshe. My mother is my Isheshe. The ocean is a great expanse. This comes from the Odu Ogunda Oworin, which talks about our connection with our past, our lineage, and remembering where we come from. I belong to the sycamore tree that takes its home right by the water at the river. I belong to the California pearly everlasting that has a kind of mapley brown sugar smell that drifts through the trails, in particular during the spring and summer. I belong to my kindreds, the people that I love. I belong to hope. I belong to grief. I belong to joy. I belong to the dance. I belong to rhythms, the waning gibbous moon and the waxing crescent moon, and my heartbeat and my cerebral spinal fluid.
So you said a couple of things there that I think for the uninitiated listener, and I don't necessarily mean into a particular tradition, but uninitiated into even the fact that these wisdoms, these other ways of being and other ways of knowing exist. If you could maybe break down for us what Isheshe means and what an Odu is and what tradition it comes from.
So Odu comes from the tradition of Ifa, which is originally from Yoruba land. It's a spiritual practice, and Ifa has many channels through which it's practiced in the African diaspora, such as Condomble and Santeria and Lukumi. And Odu is a container. It comes when we do divination, when we sit on the mat with the Babalao, the priest, the father of the secrets. It's a message that contains information. There's many verses inside of one Odu. There's 256 Odus. Not every verse may apply to the person who's sitting there. It is a container that holds a person during a period of time that gives some insight, that gives some caution around certain behaviors and ways to navigate what's going on in a person's life at that moment. And it also gives some affirmation. And Isheshe, we talk about Isheshe as being the original practice, so the first practice, where the roots of Ifa come from. Oftentimes, if people are practicing different manifestations of Ifa, like Condomble or Lukumi, one might say, I practice Isheshe, meaning they're practicing Ifa from a particular lineage in Yoruba land, which Yoruba land is now known as Nigeria, Benin, Togo. Isheshe can also just mean roots. So when I say my father and my mother are my Isheshe, I'm saying they're my roots. They're who I come from.
Why is it important for you to be identified to yourself as in connection with all of these things, but also to other people as in relation to all of these things?
Great question. Such a good question, Giovanni. Okay. Because it helps me to locate myself in time and space and in relationship to other people. Suddenly, I feel like I come from a history, not one that's painted on a page that I'm reading about that feels removed from me somehow, but a history that lives inside of my body. When I can tune into a sense of embodiment, then it becomes real. It's no longer this theoretical idea navigating the world and my purpose or my calling or whatever we want to call it. The work that I feel drawn to do, then suddenly I can understand it better as being channeled through myself and all of these other filters that are happening. So I can show up in a particular way. I feel more grounded and have a clear idea of why it is that I am doing the work that I want to do.
So in my spiritual community, one of the things that's said often, I hear this in other healing spaces as well, is that we're not meant to do this alone. And what you're presencing is that community is paramount, and community is not just humans. Right. So it's humans, it's animals, it's, all the beings, no matter how many legs or wings that they have, the trees and everything that is rooted in the earth, also the spirit world. Right. That is your community, and that is, you are never alone. Is that sort of what you're saying, and why this is important?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you've mentioned a few Odus at this point. You did tell us what Odu meant, and then you mentioned one immediately, the Ogunda Owonrin, and then just now you mentioned two more. Again, for the uninitiated, people who are new to your world, maybe give us a little background, because I feel like you're going to keep coming back to Ifa, and you're going to be referring to Odus. What I find fascinating about Odus is it's a scripture for those who grew up in Christianity. It's a scripture, or in any of the Abrahamic religions, there are scriptures. So that concept is not foreign, even if the Odu or the word Odu is not familiar to you. You understand what a scripture from a sacred text is.
Right.
It just might help people or help them orient if they understood what your relationship to Ifa was.
Also, I just want to say the sacred text of Ifa was historically not written down. It was an oral sacred text that was passed down. So we can think of it as the sacred text being the body of the Babalaos and Iyanifas and Babalorishas and Iyalorishas that were passing down this information throughout the lineages. And my relationship with Ifa is I've been a practitioner for 10 years, I would say, because I was first introduced to this practice through a dance teacher of mine at UC Berkeley, Amara Tabor Smith, who is initiated in the Lukumi tradition as a priest of Yemoja. And she would bring in aspects of Afro-Cuban and Afro-Brazilian dance as well as capoeira, and was teaching us about Orisha. And my whole life changed in that semester of school. The first Orisha that I danced for was Ogun. And the Ogun rhythm was being played on the drum machine. It wasn't even live drumming, but Vasi just hit me and I felt something. It was like permission to be my warrior self.
Okay.
And then we were put into different groups to learn about a particular Orisha, and I was put into the Oya group, and I was having a lot of problems in my marriage. It was really toxic and unhealthy, and they say that if you can't get things together, sometimes Orisha will come in and do it for you, and it's not always going to be pretty, and it's usually not pretty if Oya comes in. It was so necessary. My whole life transformed after that. My whole life transformed. Fast forward, I met Baba Fashigun and Iya Fayomi of Ilea Rumila Afedafeo here in Los Angeles, and they've been my teachers. 2 years ago, I was initiated in Ibadan under the lineage of our teacher, Prince Valuwo Adesanya Awoyade, who is the lineage bearer of this particular lineage in Ibadan, Nigeria, in Ogun State. And I was initiated into Ogun.
I think it's important that people understand, for reference, why you're bringing in these particular scriptures or Odus. And it strikes me as I'm asking the question, one way that people talk about Orisha is that they are forces of nature. And given that your podcast is about
journey, home, connection, and spirit.
And land, this actually goes back to your answer about who you belong to and what is the landscape, because there's a reticulation that's happening, right? There's like this webbing. A verb that I like is it's constellating, right? Between the land, the people, the practices, the oral tradition, the concept of home and belonging in that particular tradition. And so how all of that is weaving together to tell some story that we're in. We don't know what the story is yet because we're in it. We know maybe a chapter or a chapter at a time, but we haven't read the whole book. The book is still being written, to present metaphor. Okay, so the other thing I'm hearing you talk about is how you came to Ifa or were introduced to Ifa in a dance class. So you've been a dancer forever, right? And a massage therapist for a long time. And so you definitely have a relationship with the body that perhaps is deeper than the average bear. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between your artistic, embodied, and ancestral practices?
When you said you've been a dancer forever, as a kid, I was in the standard trifecta of ballet, modern jazz, and jazz being like a very, fussy, whitewashed version of jazz origins. Yeah. And I learned to dance according to the mirror. There was a relationship with dance to where I was coordinated and I was able to grab onto choreography and learn it and do it, but I wasn't very embodied because I was seeing myself in the mirror. And because if you're constantly looking at yourself through the mirror, it's a two-dimensionalized experience.
Yeah.
I developed a lot of habitual patterns in my body that were unhealthy through ballet. And not to say that it was just how I interpreted the information.
Not that ballet is inherently bad.
Not that ballet is inherently bad. I mean, it's not great for the body, but there's ways in which the information can be interpreted into a connected, embodied way, and I wasn't embodied. So I was I think of myself as split right in the middle. There was not connection between my upper and lower body.
Okay.
And then I stopped dancing the whole time that I was married until the end. And when I went back to school at Long Beach State College, I started taking dance classes, and I was still not super connected. And then at Berkeley, I was taking dance classes, and it was this dance class with Amar Tabor Smith. A guest teacher came from Senegal and taught a little bit of, I don't think it was Sabara actually that he was teaching. I think he was teaching from the Akoni method. The drummer was playing the talking drum. He was trying to get us to move here in the thoracic spine. And I could shake my hips, but I couldn't move through my spine. There was no relationship with that. But hearing that drum woke something up in my heart, and I call it my dancer's joy, which I hadn't experienced. I don't know if I had ever experienced, but it felt like I had. I feel like dance and rhythm is an ancestral right, but I also want to say that it can be and is, this is one of the aspects of the complexities and the paradoxes. I'm very cognizant of myself entering certain spaces as a white person. There is so much ashe in the drumming from West Africa. It lights people up. It's enthralling. I feel like it makes people want to dance, and that's the beauty of it. But because the people in our own European lineage, we've lost connection to a particular drum rhythm, which I'm sure there were drum rhythms in different tribes across Europe. I'm sure there was some kind of relationship with a drum because that is an indigenous medicine, and we all have indigenous medicine in our histories. But because we've lost our relationship with ancestral practices, perhaps, then we might be drawn to other indigenous ancestral practices. And with that can come a desire to take without reciprocity, without listening to all of the landscape around that, what that means, how it is a healing modality for people whose ancestry is African, and it is a way to maybe heal a lot of trauma. It's something to pay attention to as a white person. I think it's important to say. And it's the same thing, and this goes back to this relationship with Ifa as a white person practicing. It's already Ifa is an ancestral practice, so it's just inherent in the technology. But I think it's particularly important for me to have such a strong relationship with my ancestors so that I can walk with integrity in this practice.
What you're giving me insight into is, we didn't explicitly state in the beginning of the podcast that you're a white lady who is deeply entrenched in this indigenous West African religion, and in some ways also in those dance and drum practices. So I'm happy that you presence that. I think a lot of times we just wash over it. And I think Black folks do it. I think white folks do it. It's a thing that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. I think people either ignore it or they don't know what to say, so they just sort of let it ride. but they have feelings about it, that they don't acknowledge, or they're all on the other side and like, white people should not be doing this, right? And so we're somewhere in the middle with an acknowledgement and a continued practice. I remember sitting in dance classes or, dancing in dance classes going, well, I'm going to be in the front line because the white girl shouldn't be in the front line. Fuck that. I want to be in the front line. And so I had to get better and know what the fuck I was doing, right? And learn the practices and go and study and take classes from more than one person. Because there was a point when I was like, well, I can only afford to go to dance class once a week, as a student when I was in college or grad school. And then I was like, well, I can't afford to not go as many times as possible in a week because it's doing something, there's something else happening here. So there was my own personal cultural edification. There was, damn that, there's 3 spots. It's not going to be 3 white girls. I'm getting in the front. And also there were the moments where like, oh, but that girl really can dance, and probably actually dancing better than me. I think it really depends on how a person passes on the knowledge. And maybe this is way off topic, but
it's so on topic.
Okay.
And thank you for talking about this.
It's really, I don't really talk about it very much because for me, it's been all about my struggle with identity, with my Black identity. And from the first time I heard the drums, I had a very similar experience. Like, wait, what? Something is happening inside of my body. Like I am being compelled to move in a way that my body has never moved before. Like I don't, and I can't really do it, but I feel like it's pulling me, like it is pulling me out of my chair. That's what happened the day that I tore my labrum. The drums were playing, we'd been dancing for an hour and a half, and I was like, oh wait, the solo. And then
it was so good, Giovanni. It was so good.
I'm still, 5 years later, I'm still damaged. I think it depends on how the information gets passed. This was underscored for me when I was studying with Malidoma Somé, whose name means something like share with a stranger. So from birth, he was given the task, he was assigned, or maybe even before birth, his ancestral assignment was to come and share the Dagara culture with the West, or with the rest of the world. And so as a result, when I'm going to train with him as a Black person, and I'm in a room with 15, 16, 20 other people, I'm looking around and I'm like, the hell? Why am I the only Black person? It was a hard conversation. To this day, I don't agree with him. But Malidoma was like, listen, the person who's sitting in front of you, yeah, they have a body, but they've had many other lives and they weren't always in this body. What's coming through can't be based on the physicality of the person in front of you. And for that reason, I can give this knowledge to other people because they may have been, he didn't exactly say this, but they may have been African in another life. It didn't matter to him. That wasn't the important thing. The important thing was making that wisdom available to folks. And I didn't argue with him, but I may have copped an attitude and folded my arms and sat back. And just and rolled my eyes. I'm sure I wasn't that disrespectful, but I just didn't agree. Also, he is not an American, right? So he doesn't necessarily understand the Black American experience, even though he has a different experience that I don't understand. Like he got a PhD in France, right? And his people were colonized in a different way than my people were colonized. I mean, sort of by the same people, but differently. And he was an elder, like he was 70 or something years old, and he was having this conversation with people. There was part of me that's just like, okay, I'm not gonna really try to fight back because whatever, he's the elder. But in my soul, I'm like, you can't divorce the person from the body they're in this moment.
Right.
And the experience they've walked through the world with, they've walked as a Black person. Yeah. I'm sure there's white people in my lineage. I don't look like a white person. Someone once told me I looked exotic, which I thought was, they said, oh, you have freckles, you're exotic. I was like, what? Anyway, this was a white man. It was very interesting to me, but I don't walk through the world as a white person. And so my experience is not, even if I had a past life regression once and they told me that I was at one point, I was in the potato famine in Russia. I have no connection to that story. Even energetically, I have no connection to that story. So but let's just say it's true. My experience right now can't negate, you can't say, just because you were Russian then doesn't mean that you're not Black now. And you don't have this experience of being an almost 50-year-old person in America at this particular time. Having sat on your great-grandmother's lap, hearing the stories of her grandparents being enslaved. You can't separate that. And so while I don't know if I can 100% say that I don't begrudge these other folks getting trained, because they're all super respectful. They all do the work. And in some cases, Malidoma had to tell them that they needed to charge. Because they were like, well, I will learn and I will serve, but I won't charge. And he was like, damn that, you need to charge. So there's all these layers and all these perspectives. One of the things I sort of fully expect is that I will come to some sort of reconciliation with my white ancestors. Because the ones that I know about are there I suspect, this is not the story that my family is telling me, but I suspect that they're there because of rape. The story I get is, oh, there was no rape in our family, baby, but you know how they did the servants. Like, that's literally what those words came out of their mouths. And I'm like, yeah, they raped them. Do you know what I mean? I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. I'm not laughing at the rape. I'm laughing at the cognitive dissonance, right? The deliberate cognitive dissonance. And maybe it's not deliberate. My point is, I have not yet invited those ancestors or their ancestors into my inner sanctum. I mean, I acknowledge them as people. It's clear that I'm not 100% African, but I'm not ready to bring them in. This is a long story. What's going a long way. And so I struggle when I see the white girl drumming or the white person drumming. I do think a whole nother thing happens when you bring capitalism into it and you start charting. I do think it's a whole nother thing. But anyway, we've gone way far afield. Okay, enough of that. But where I was trying to go with this, specifically back to your other example with the dance, when and the class with, I'm sorry, you've said the name twice, of the teacher in Berkeley.
Oh, Amara Tabor Smith.
And you said the first thing you danced was Ogun. Mm-hmm. So, and now you're also initiated into Ogun. And I'd like you just to tell us a little bit about that.
I do also want to say the embodied piece is really important. Having these challenging conversations, it's easy to jump out of the body. I experience it a lot when I feel like I am in a position of being identified as a white-bodied person, so therefore having representation as the oppressor. The first response is kind of to jump out of my body so that I don't have to feel those feelings. But it's actually far more generative to allow my body to be with the discomfort of that. And then, as I'm doing my own work, I can have a greater capacity to witness and listen and be with other experiences. And it goes back to that locating myself in time and space and history, because it's not just about my own lineage and my ancestors, but it's understanding about how my ancestors were colonized and then all of the repercussions that happen. And then now what it means to be a white settler on this land with many different people's experiences. I'm not an isolated individual. My experiences that I have in this life, pains, joys, it's all interconnected. So I can choose to ignore certain things that are happening and have happened on this land. I can choose to isolate myself and be around a particular culture or group that perpetuates this ignoring of what's happening, or I can allow myself to actually take it all in and realize all of the interconnectedness.
So when you're speaking, I realized what my point was that I never did make. This is actually going to change the way that I ask you the question about Ogun. Because so much of this is oral, I mean, sure, people are writing things down now, but the way that it was passed for thousands of years was completely like, you sit at my feet, you have you have some sticks, you're hitting the ground, or you're watching me dance from your baby seat through years and years and years. And so you get it by living it and by it being around you.
Ashe.
In this context, because it's happening in a class situation, there's a determined amount of time, dedicated amount of time. You're usually paying for a class. It's discrete. There's these you get it in discrete packets. That's what I'm trying to say. I think it's really important that we remember our teachers and that we name our teachers.
Yes.
Right? And for example, the rhythm cuckoo. Do, 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 do. Okay, so as a doom doom player, you gotta have the do, 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 do. But there's all this other stuff that can happen. And they're in LA, there must be 14 different cuckoos. I've got a Malik cuckoo. I've got maybe 3 or 4 Malik cuckoos. There's a Maget cuckoo. There's actually 3 or 4 Maget cuckoos. There's a Pop Juve cuckoo. There's a solo cuckoo. There's a Abubakar Kuyate.
I need to say Abubakar.
Kuyate cuckoo. There's Willie cuckoo. There's Olivier cuckoo. Olivier's not even here anymore, but his cuckoo is still here. Do you know what I mean? It's important to name, even if those guys made it up on the fly, it's important to name where I got the thing. And so, I don't care what your race is, I think you have to name your teachers, right? And I think especially if you're a white folk, to show respect and honor to the lineages, you need to name the people as much as you can, right? It's maybe not always possible, but as much as you can. Thank you for saying what you said, because it triggered that thought again that got lost when I was saying all the other words. I want to reframe the question as a teacher. Like, what do you give Ogun honor for as your teacher? Like, what are the lessons that he has taught you?
Ashe, that's so good. Ogun is alagbede. He is the blacksmith. So he is able to transform metal from one thing into another thing, and therefore he is revered as a magician, has multiple talents. And for me, that speaks to a reminder to trust all of the different modalities that I'm drawn to and to look at them as technologies. Ogun is also governs technology, many different technologies. So the technology of iron, how it can be forged to make tools, but it can also be forged to make weapons. This is one part of Ogun that's so beautiful to me because Ogun is a warrior. Ogun is depicted with big muscles, usually holding a machete or a hammer, hammering something on an anvil. He's very strong, but there's also a deep, deep sensitivity. And sometimes Ogun will retreat into the forest. There's a story, I think it's in Ogunda Meji. Ogunda Meji talks about cutting the fish in half. And so maybe this is related. I think Ogun can bring people together, but he can also get really upset when he's given people something to use as a tool, but it's used as a weapon instead. And that's when Ogun just wants to retreat and not deal with society anymore. And there's a lot of anger there. I've learned about my anger through Ogun, and what he helps me with is channeling that anger into passion instead of defeat. Ogun is Asiwaju, a warrior leader. He's the first on the battlefield and the last to leave. Nobody knows more about war than an Ogun, and that's the paradox of war. Sometimes something has to be fought, but it means that someone is going to get hurt. There's a lot of sacrifice in fighting for something. It's the ability to hold the space for leading and knowing that with the fight, there's going to be pain and loss, and choosing to move forward anyway for a higher cause, for a higher reason. Ogun also teaches me about patience. In Ogbe Suuru, it says, Suuru ni baba iwa, which means patience is the father of good character. And I think it's also, patience is the sibling to listening. And so when I can be embodied, I can be a better listener, and I can listen to my timing in relationship to other people's timing. It's kind of like feeling the rhythm in my body. I think I used to dance a little bit too in front of the rhythm because I was so excited. So to really hear the rhythm and to feel the rhythm and to be able to lean, sit in the pocket.
You have used the word technology multiple times in our conversation today. And I feel like you've been weaving a story that's taking us to joy. And I think it's through these technologies that you've been referencing.
Right.
I think you're weaving joy, right? And I think joy is the key to freedom. My job as a facilitator of liberation is to help people understand that the way we get free is by finding joy in the small moments.
Ashe.
I do think it's important that you can identify what brings you joy. Also, what's been identified for me here today is that you actually create joy. What has happened here today is that there's a tapestry in front of me of all these different technologies to which you are referring that make you a joy generator.
I love that.
Off the dome.
And I think that this goes back to being embodied, ancestral practices, artistic practices. And to talk about artistic, I'm such an advocate of art because artists have a unique way of taking in the information around them and speaking their truth through their modality. That is, it's like stepping out of the way so that something else can come through them. And it comes into the rest of us that are listening, watching, receiving the work it kind of bypasses our analytical mind. I mean, we can then go and analyze it, but our first interaction with it is embodied. And so it's a way of being able to take in experiences that maybe aren't our own and to take them into our body. So I feel like that's very important. The more we give ourselves permission to be in our body, the more that we can draw this map of ancestry, this tapestry of ancestry, especially with our own self, then we can be present for other people's ancestors. My Baba always says, I pray that I don't offend somebody else's ancestors. So it's a way of acknowledging that as we're walking in this world, we're not walking alone. We have a whole posse with us. And when we come into relationship with other people, they have their posse. So it's beginning to map out something that gives us a little bit more understanding. Through that understanding, compassion can develop. That understanding first for ourselves and maybe why we do things, why we respond in certain ways, why certain emotions come up. And then we can cultivate compassion for ourselves first and foremost, and then begin to grow capacity for having compassion for other people. And when we live in this space of understanding and compassion, joy comes in so easily, joy and gratitude, which with gratitude, so much grace comes in.
A friend of mine who's also a coach, one of the things she says to her clients is, like when they're really struggling with something and, it's often when their response is sort of bigger than the thing that happened, it doesn't really match. She's like, instant grace. And I have adopted that and said instant and infinite grace, right? And then I've gone a step further and said to folks, and if you don't believe that you can have that, I'll hold it for you and you can borrow mine. I haven't quite thought of it as a precursor to joy. I've thought of it as more like a soothing technique, or a soothing technology, to use your word. But I think it's so critical. And again, this colonial pace in which we live and in which we work and we drive and we're always going. It's better, faster, more now. There's a lot of opportunities for failure inside of that system and for disappointment and for not meeting the goal in the amount of time in the way you're supposed to meet it. And it's just instant and infinite grace. It's almost a tool of recalibration. And I like what you're saying because I like thinking of it. It actually brings me joy to think of it as a precursor to joy. So you can start by giving yourself, this is me talking to a hypothetical client. Let's start with the instant and infinite grace. And in a couple steps, you might find some joy inside of the situation, whatever it is that's going on, X situation. Like first, let's breathe. Let's breathe about this thing, and remember that you're not in this alone. Like I'm here with you, but you're also connected in this constellation of beings, of elements, of energies, of spirit, of ancestors. Perspective is really useful. And when I stop thinking of myself as the biggest or the most important in this situation, which is what we're doing when things go wrong. We're like, I'm to blame because I'm the most important thing. And it's like, actually, you're not. And I'm saying this to me as much as I say it to my clients, right? Actually, you're not. It's like when a balloon is too filled and it's about to pop, you just release the valve, let some air out. You're like, oh, the relief, the release. Like we all need that sort of button to push.
Yeah.
I don't know why this is coming in right now, but we're in this moment of like great climatic turmoil in Southern California, right? With all these fires, these crazy winds, many people, like thousands of people have lost their homes. Businesses have been demolished. Schools have been demolished. Demolished seems like the wrong word, but obliterated. They've been burned to the ground. It feels almost too simple, but I feel like there's a lot of angst in the air. My family was fine. We were not really threatened by the flames. The air quality was really terrible, but we weren't threatened by the flames. And also, I was stressed. Do you know what I mean? So I can only imagine what the people who are actually going through this particular trauma at this moment are experiencing. And so I think, okay, this is a great practice. We're not alone. I'm going to hold the instant and infinite grace for them as people are going through this event. I want to say like the choices that we have made as a world to get us to this point. Where a spark could cause this much harm. I think that's a very poignant description or demonstration of how connected to the land we really are. I am a city girl. I was born in Los Angeles. I'm almost 50. I spent 10 years living elsewhere. I lived in Tallahassee. I lived in Miami. I lived in Atlanta. Those are all cities, right? I mean, Tallahassee is a small city, but it's a city. And then I lived in Brazil for a year, also in a city. Like, I don't know where my food comes from. You know, sometimes I go to the grocery store and I was like, who grew this carrot? And where did it come from? And, a question I had as a kid was, if we grow oranges in California, why are we getting oranges from Florida? Like, I don't understand what that's about. You know what I mean? So I don't know where my food comes from.
That's a very keen observation.
Right? As an 8-year-old, it was interesting. So when something like this fire happens that literally decimated 2 cities inside of Los Angeles, which is a 10 million person county that has 88 cities, right? Decimated the Palisades, decimated Altadena. These folks, they lost everything. Some people got out with just the clothes that they were wearing. So they are now staying in places with friends or in shelters, or some people were sleeping on the street or in their cars. I went to the grocery store this morning. And again, where does my food come from? If something happens like the fires, I don't know where we would get food from. In my genealogical research, Sophia Butler Lester is my great-great-great-grandmother. We have identified that her children, some of them were born just before emancipation and some of them were born just after. She was an enslaved woman on the Mimosa plantation in East Texas. But what we have learned is that her children became a veterinarian. They became a mayor. They were landowners. There was a creek that ran through the back of their land, and they shared the bounty of the fresh creek water, and they also grew food. Right? And they shared that bounty with their neighbors. And there's something so compelling to me about that story. And I'm like, oh, wait, that shit's in my DNA. The wisdom is in my lineage. I don't know how to tend land, but the wisdom is in my lineage, right? We can, and I have threatened to have a raised bed garden, but it's a threat. I know I'm not going to do it. I'm a city girl. But it totally changed my perspective and capacity it made me reimagine my relationship to land. So we quote unquote own this house, right? It's probably on a 1/4 acre of land, maybe even 1/8 of an acre. It's not very much land. But I started saying, we're stewarding this land. We don't have the best sunlight, but if I felt compelled to grow a garden, I actually think that we could be successful. I don't know that it would be enough to really feed us through a winter or whatever, because then there's the whole storing and preserving and all of that. But there's something that it shifted the way that I thought about my relationship to land. And then if I think about it historically, even beyond those ancestors, of course, the Africans that were brought here, they were taken because of their knowledge about tending the land. They were taken because they were rice farmers, some of them. They were taken because they knew how to do particular things. While most Black folks in this country tend to be concentrated in cities, right, which takes us away from our rural wisdom, the fact is it's in our lineages. And so historically, 500 years ago, my people were rice farmers or peanut farmers. I actually know that they were peanut farmers on my dad's side. On my dad's lineage, they come from Burkina Faso. So that's very far away and it seems a little inaccessible. But to know, my grandmother's grandmother tended land, they owned land and they had a fresh creek and they grew vegetables and fruit that they shared with people. I'm like, oh, the capacity to tend and generate and create bounty to share from the land is in my lineage. And that is something that I would pray for. Given that you are creating this Any Place podcast series that will eventually tell stories of other lands and people from other lands, I want to know what your prayer is.
My prayer is that we remember who we are and why we came here.
Ashe.
Thank you for listening today. For show notes and more information about Dr. Giovanni Washington, please go to anyplacepodcast.com. For functional movement strategies and embodied practices, visit my YouTube channel at Robin Anyplace. This episode was recorded on the traditional homelands of the Tongva Gabrielino people.